Hello there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Monday, November 7th, and tonight we're talking about your vote.
So we've got a great opportunity here on Tuesday to make our voice heard.
This election isn't a referendum, it's a choice.
We're winning big, big, big in the Republican Party.
That's our task. Let's get to work.
Midterm election day is almost here. Control of Congress is at stake, and every race counts. We'll check in on a few of the big races across the country. Steve Kornacki is at the big board to put it all in perspective. But it's not just candidates we're watching. Issues like abortion, marijuana, and even slavery are on some ballots. Hallie Jackson has more on the measures that could change state laws. Soon we'll be rid of those endless political ads on TV and in our email and in our text messages. But do these ads even work? A political scientist joins us to explain what difference campaign advertising makes. And Ken Delanian has more on a man who pled guilty after stealing billions of dollars in Bitcoin. How are the feds catching criminals who use crypto? Tomorrow is the beginning of the end of the midterms. The votes could take time to count, but Election Day is almost here. 42 million Americans have already cast their ballots, and now candidates are making their final cases to undecided voters. President Biden just wrapped up a rally in Bowie, Maryland. He was there for a Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Wes Moore. In the battleground state of Pennsylvania, rallies are underway for Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman and Republican candidate Dr. Mehmet Oz. Lieutenant Governor Fetterman is expected to take the stage in Pittsburgh in the next hour. Dr. Oz is in Montgomery County, that's in the suburbs north of Philadelphia. The latest 538 polling average shows Dr. Oz with an extremely slim lead over Fetterman. It's the first time this particular indicator has shown Fetterman even slightly behind, though, to be clear, they're basically tied. We also just learned that the Fetterman campaign has filed a lawsuit in the Western District of Pennsylvania. It argues that undated mail-in and absentee ballots should indeed be counted. That's something the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court has already decided against. That suit to overturn that was just filed. Meanwhile, former President Trump remains on the campaign trail. He's been stumping for his party's candidates and maybe a bit for himself, considering he's got a possible run in 2024. Mr. Trump is headlining a rally in Ohio for Republican Senate candidate J.D. Vance. He will take the stage at Dayton International Airport any moment now. Mr. Vance is facing off against Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan. The polling average there shows Vance in the lead, and that lead's gone back and forth over the last few months. We're also watching the Senate race in Nevada. Democratic incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto is facing Republican Adam Laxalt. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg attended an event with Senator Masto today. Tonight, the secretary plans to appear alongside Governor Steve Sisolak for his re-election campaign. Our team of reporters is here to break it all down. Gary Grumbach is in Salt Lake City. Steve Kornacki is at the big board. But let's begin with NBC's Jacob Soboroff, who joins us from Las Vegas. Jacob, talk about the state of the races there.
Well, you just put the numbers up, Joshua. It is close. It is about as close as it can be. When it's within the margin of error, you have both campaigns biting their fingernails this evening, and they will not stop campaigning until, in my opinion, the last vote is tallied and the last vote is counted. And that'll actually happen here in Las Vegas in the building behind me, the Clark County Election Department. There are 1.3 million registered voters here in the Las Vegas area. Hundreds of thousands of them have already cast their ballots. Those ballots are sitting inside this building right now, but you continue to hear messaging from both of the candidates. Adam Laxalt has been crisscrossing this state on a bus tour. Catherine Cortez Masto has been here in Las Vegas, as you mentioned, with Secretary Buttigieg earlier today. A harp on what I think and what we have heard is the number one issue in Nevada, and that is unaffordability and the steep cost of living here. It's a state with one of the highest unemployment rates and one of the highest inflation rates in the nation. And it's not just us, the candidates I guarantee you are hearing that every single day. And they are trying to make their case to the voters that they are the best one to help people out at their pocketbooks in this state at this very difficult time.
Jacob, the Department of Justice says it's going to monitor the polls in 64 jurisdictions in 24 states. Nevada is among them. What are the concerns there, and how are local officials reacting to that monitoring?
Well, I talked to Joe Gloria not too long ago inside this building. He's the county registrar recorder here in Clark County, Nevada. He's the man responsible for the election that I just mentioned to you. And as the machinery of democracy is moved out of this building and across this county this evening to prepare for the election in person tomorrow, he is welcoming with open arms the Department of Justice, saying that those federal monitors are going to come here not because of civil rights violations, but to monitor for potential civil rights violations. You'll remember that Adam Laxalt, who was running against Cortez Masto, gave a press conference outside this building 2 years ago, alleging thousands of illegitimate ballots were cast in Nevada. That, of course, turned out to be a bogus theory, a conspiracy theory, one might say, that was debunked not only by the Republican Secretary of State, but by other independent investigations. And to Joe Gloria, that is a very serious thing as the nonpartisan election administrator here. He's worried about people's faith in the integrity of the elections at a time where he feels like they're doing everything they can to protect it. As a nonpartisan election administrator, when you have candidates in an election question the integrity of the machinery of democracy, so to speak, your job, what does that do, number one, for you as an election administrator, but number two, for the competence of the vote?
Well, there's disinformation there, and so unfortunately there are people who are willing to listen to that. It's discouraging because they should really do their homework and speak the truth as to what we actually do. Our systems are federally and state certified. We couldn't purchase those systems and use them if they weren't certified. And all of the tests that we run verify that everything is being tabulated accurately. We're very confident in our process here.
In other words, he's not worried about people's votes being cast and counted. He's worried about people coming in to intimidate people from doing just that, Joshua.
Jacob, as we mentioned, there's many millions of votes cast already. I believe it's over 600,000 that have been cast in Nevada so far. What have you heard from voters?
Yeah, here in Clark County, at least 300,000 alone. Then you've got Washoe County and all the other rural counties all throughout this state. The number one issue, as I mentioned to you, is by far the economy that we continue to hear. We've been out with the Culinary Workers Union. It is that 60,000 member strong political powerhouse here in Nevada. And as they go door to door, literally going to 1 million homes in this state, having 165,000 or so conversations with voters here. That is what they continue to hear over and over again. And that's a conversation that their members are very familiar with, because the Culinary Workers Union is made up of literally the people that make Las Vegas run. The hotel cleaners, the bartenders, the casino table operators, the valet parking attendants. I mean, people top to bottom who are inside the places that when you think of Las Vegas, that is who is making this place run and operate. And they say it's hard to make a living here. And so that's what they're turning to the candidates ultimately to solve for them. The Culinary Workers Union says the Democrats have the best plan. Obviously, Adam Laxalt disagrees.
And Jacob, I hate to make you my pan-Western election correspondent, but are there other races in the region that you're keeping an eye on? I start thinking about the LA mayor's race, for example. That is going to be, I think, highly, highly consequential between Karen Bass and Rick Caruso. But what other races are you watching?
Well, outside, and that's my home jurisdiction. I'm a Los Angeles voter. But outside of Los Angeles, there are also critical, especially in California, critical congressional races. 4 years ago during the midterm elections, we were in Santa Ana, California, where at the time there were 4 red congressional districts that President Biden was trying to flip blue. And indeed, he ultimately did do that. Those same districts in California this year are at risk, including perhaps most notably and most importantly, Katie Porter's district in Orange County, California, of going back the other direction. That's why you're seeing national Democratic politicians all throughout here in the Southwest, from Arizona to Nevada to California, you name it. They are stumping in those districts. But yeah, a lot of those districts in the so-called blue wave 4 years ago, the Republicans are eyeing this time around, and especially in my native Southern California.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. That's NBC's Jacob Soboroff, starting us off tonight from Las Vegas. Let's head now from Nevada to Utah, where a kind of unusual Senate race is underway. Republican Senator Mike Lee is running for re-election. His opponent is someone he voted for a few years ago, former presidential candidate Evan McMullin. Complicating things further, Mr. McMullin is running as an independent, and he has said that if he wins, he's not going to caucus with the Democrats or the Republicans. The Senate is split 50-50 right now. Polling suggests a number of races could be close, so this race could be a big deal in the fight for Senate control. Let's continue now with NBC's Gary Grumbach, who joins us from Salt Lake City. Gary, where does the race stand tonight?
Yeah, Joshua, this race is a lot closer than some political experts thought it would be. And that's what we've seen over the past couple days. Both candidates crisscrossing the state, trying to get every single voter they can. Because, as you mentioned, this is a really unique race. I don't think there's any other Senate race in the country where one candidate actually supported a previous candidate in a previous election, the presidential election in 2016, when Mike Lee supported Evan McMullin. So it's interesting for that reason. It's also interesting because Evan McMullin is an independent. So he's getting support from Democrats, he's getting support from independents, but he's also getting support from conservatives, which could be Mike Lee voters. Joshua?
What about turnout and reaction to some of these candidates? I mean, part of what I think Evan McMullin has tried to capitalize on, at least in his mind, is the discontent among some Republicans and some conservatives in Utah with the direction of the party, with some of its standard bearers like Donald Trump, on a purely kind of a values voter stance. But what have you heard from voters, and what are they telling you?
Yeah, we have seen some serious turnout in this race already. More than a third of all registered voters participated in early voting, and we were at a ballot drop box earlier today. Almost every few seconds, a car was coming up, dropping their ballot in the box, and we have some video to show you here. The box was literally overflowing with ballots, and election officials were taking care of that and bringing that down to headquarters. But voters here tell me that they care about the kitchen table issues. That's what matters to them. They tell me that here in Utah. They've told me that at Trump rallies in Iowa. Down in Alabama. They tell me that everywhere we go, it's the kitchen table issues, but it's also the state of our democracy. Joshua?
Yeah, let's listen to a little bit of what some Utah voters have told us so far. Watch.
It's really important to me that women have the right to choose what they want to do with their body.
Inflation, the state of the economy, and the upcoming high prices on gas. I think those are the things most important for us because
I'm not fed up with politics. I'm fed up with the attitude that fuels the politics. Again, that's what it's all about. This is a democracy.
Hearing a lot of a variety of issues in Salt Lake City. Granted, Salt Lake City is a bit of a blue city in a rather red state, so it may or may not match what you would hear in Provo or other parts of the state of Utah. But what about those kind of national issues, particularly Senator Lee and his existing relationship, his existing connections to former President Trump? How's that playing out?
Yeah, Senator Lee's relationship with President Trump is varied. It started out in 2016 where he didn't support the former president's run for president. He supported Evan McMullin. Then he became a Trump fan soon after Trump won the presidency, and he became such a Trump fan that while he didn't vote against certifying the election in 2020 on January 6th, he did send those now famous text messages to Mark Meadows with schemes and ideas of ways of support saying, yes, we can get Donald Trump to stay in office. So the relationship there has certainly changed. And as we see, former President Donald Trump is close to, it seems, making a presidential announcement. We'll see where Senator Mike Lee stands in the coming weeks.
And before I got to let you go, Gary, do we have any sense of how voters feel about a candidate like Evan McMullin who would not necessarily caucus consistently? You know, Bernie Sanders is an independent, but he always caucuses with Democrats. It's kind of expected. It seems like there's a lane that's kind of been carved out in the Senate lately with senators like Joe Manchin from West Virginia, Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, who are Democrats, but they still kind of need to be courted, and that gives them tremendous sway in the Senate. But how do Utahns feel about Evan McMullin not promising who he'll caucus with?
Well, this is so interesting, right? Because there's so much talk about having more than a two-party system, more than just Republicans and Democrats. So when Evan McMullin does and tries to become an independent, now he's seen by voters and by other legislators as sort of a pariah who nobody knows where he's going to necessarily vote on any piece of legislation. And there's also an interesting point here where if he does get elected tomorrow and he is a U.S. senator, there's a real good chance he's not on any committees, the ones that actually craft the legislation, because those committees are created by the parties themselves. And of course, they choose members of their party to be part of those committees. So it'll be a real interesting scene in Washington in January, should Evan McMullin become a U.S. senator.
Yeah, as if Washington isn't interesting enough these days. But thank you, Gary. That is NBC's Gary Grumbach, continuing our coverage outside the Utah State Capitol in Salt Lake City. Now, these are just a few of the races that we're watching for tomorrow. But what about the political climate leading into the midterms? Let's dig into that with NBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Hey, Steve.
All right, Joshua. Well, the eve of the midterm election we've been anticipating for a long time, and some mixed signals, I would say, in the numbers, and maybe a little bit more uncertainty than we're used to seeing this close to a midterm election. Let me start. This is our NBC News poll, our final NBC News poll before the election. What you're looking at is the generic ballot. When you ask folks, Democrats, Republicans, who do you want running Congress? In our poll, it's dead even, 47-47. So if you're a Democrat and you're looking at that, been thinking all year about, this could be a potential red wave, this for Democrats is good news to see. Now, if you look underneath this number, there's some very concerning news for Democrats as well. This is what I mean about some mixed signals like this. There's Joe Biden's approval rating. It sits at just 44%. This is where it's been for a long time now, his disapproval rating. A majority of voters disapprove of the job he's doing as president. To put this in some perspective, where have other recent presidents been at this point? Our final NBC poll before their first midterm, well, you can see that Biden number of 44%, it is basically where Trump's was at this point in 2018. It's basically where Obama's was at this point in 2010. Remember, Donald Trump and the Republicans lost the House in 2018. Barack Obama and the Democrats lost the House in 2010. Biden's number as president right in line with where theirs were, and historically where presidents whose parties have taken it on the chin in midterms have been. You see the one modern exception here, George W. Bush, 2002, he was at 63% approval. This was a year after 9/11. A lot of unity behind him in the country then. Republicans actually picked up a few seats in the House in 2002. That's what it is to defy history, and for the White House party to have a good midterm, typically this is what it's taken. It's rare, but it's taken a very popular president to do it. Biden's numbers, nowhere near that. So that's a knock against Democrats. There's also this. What issues are most important to voters here? Jobs, the economy, cost of living, inflation. Easily clocking in as the first issue. And the Republican advantage on this is overwhelming, more than 40 points in our poll. Democrats do have advantage on threats to democracy and abortion. But again, you can see you add the economy, cost of living together as an issue. It is by far the number one issue. And attitudes towards the economy, they ask people, are you satisfied, dissatisfied with the state of the economy? Over 80% say they are dissatisfied with the state of the economy. To put this in some perspective, the last time we had a number that high, a dissatisfied number that high, you got to go back to the crash, the Great Recession. We're talking 2009, 2010. That's the kind of pessimism, that's the kind of mood voters feel for the economy right now. So you got Biden's approval rating, you got the centrality of the economy, you got the Republican advantage on the economy, and you got this sort of backdrop of public opinion on where the economy stands. Those are the headwinds that Democrats are facing in this midterm election, plus the fact, as I say, that generally, with very few exceptions, the opposition party has done well in midterm elections. That's what Democrats are up against in terms of the numbers here. Why, then, is the generic ballot tied at 47-47 despite all of this? Why, then, is there some uncertainty here? And do Democrats have some reason to have some hope that, hey, maybe this won't turn out too bad tomorrow? Well, it has to do with this, enthusiasm. This is our final poll. Well, this was our poll a month ago, and we found that Republicans were more motivated by a 9-point score than Democrats to turn out and vote in the midterm elections. We asked the same question in our final poll. We found that things had changed. in the last couple of weeks, and that now there is no enthusiasm gap between the parties. 73% of Republicans, 73% of Democrats rating themselves at the highest level of interest in these midterm elections. So we are talking about potentially record-setting turnout for this, 120, 130 million people. And if Democrats succeed in getting voters to the polls who don't approve of Joe Biden, aren't nuts about how the last 2 years have gone, certainly aren't feeling good about the economy, but ultimately, in the past, maybe it wouldn't have turned out in a midterm, but do turn out in this one, that's their cause for hope. Did they motivate voters? Maybe they're not coming out to vote for Biden and the Democrats. They motivate them to come out and vote against Republicans. That's their hope for making this competitive tomorrow.
All right, we'll see if those hopes are realized or dashed. Thank you, Steve. That's NBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Remember to stick with NBC News Now for live special coverage of the midterms. We'll have the latest on the big races, reports from across the country, and race projections as they come in. Our special coverage starts at 6 p.m. Eastern here on NBC News Now. Our midterm preview continues in just a moment with some of the ballot measures that voters will consider tomorrow. And we will dig into the relationship between people of color and the Republican Party. It seems the GOP is making inroads with more black voters. We're glad you're with us on this midterm election eve for Now Tonight from NBC News. This year, many voters are considering some big policy decisions as well as key races. A number of ballot measures are up for approval. Now, those issues can seem mundane, but this is not a year to skip them. There are more than 30 statewide ballot measures across the country involving abortion, cannabis legalization, even slavery. NBC's Hallie Jackson has the story.
Abortion, cannabis, and slavery, key topics, among others, for some of the ballot measures voters will decide on tomorrow. Start with access to abortion, now a rallying cry for some voters after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. In California, Vermont, and battleground Michigan, people will decide whether to change their state's constitution to make abortion a legal right. But in Kentucky, the ballot measure asks voters whether they should change their state's constitution to say abortion is not a protected right. Number 2, legalizing recreational cannabis. Arkansas, Missouri, Maryland, North Dakota, and South Dakota now asking voters whether they should allow it. If passed, adults 21 and up would be able to buy and possess marijuana, and in some states, they'd be able to grow it too. And number 3, slavery, because slavery as punishment for crime is technically still legal in some states. Now, prisoners are not legally considered slaves in the United States, but supporters for some of these ballot measures say they're treated much the same, forced to work for little or no pay. So the question for voters in Vermont, Oregon, Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee, whether to change that wording in their state's constitutions or get rid of the punishment exception altogether.
That's NBC's Hallie Jackson reporting. Now, both parties are pushing hard for votes just before the midterms. These days, the Republican Party seems to be making some inroads with black voters. A recent Wall Street Journal poll shows that about 17% of black voters said they would pick a Republican for Congress over a Democrat. Now, back in 2020, just 8% of black voters supported former President Trump's re-election bid, just 8%. And in 2018, 8% chose GOP candidates in House races. Now, the party says a record number of black Republicans are running for office this year. More than 24 are in competitive House races. Black voters still overwhelmingly support Democrats. But what does this subtle shift mean? Here's NBC's Zincle Esamwa.
We need black excellence everywhere. Republican, Democrat, Independent.
A key Democratic voting bloc, black people, may be turning to the Republican Party.
Because at least we're in the room to at least add some color, if you will.
I met Wesley Hunt at a Trump rally in Robstown, Texas.
That is the America that I know and love.
He's a Republican running for the state's U.S. House District 38 seat, one of a record 178 black Republican candidates running for office in 2022. Black Republicans are not new, but Howard University's Dr. Kenesha Grant says today motivators for black voters are shifting.
And so whereas people would think about race first, in the past, they now think about something like the economy first, or they might think about education first, or they might think about religion first.
This does differ by gender, with black men nearly 3 times more likely than black women to have voted for Trump. For black Republicans I spoke with, issues of faith and economy are critical.
I don't believe in homosexuality. I don't support same-sex marriage. I don't support abortion.
Thomas Isbell says religion moved his vote. Chandra, who asked to be identified by her first name, believes Democratic policies keep communities of color, quote, down economically.
The Democrat Party has never really done anything to help.
Still, Dr. Grant says these beliefs come with some reservation.
I think it's important to note that black voters describe themselves as conservative, but they face a barrier when they have to decide what to do with that conservatism.
One study in the University of Chicago Press Journals suggesting black voters are more likely to identify as Democrats around other black voters, even if they are Republican. But candidates like Wesley Hunt, now backed by former President Trump, aren't shy about their beliefs.
I'm mindful that Trump is also supported by white supremacist groups as well. Yeah. Some black voters view statements he's made as racist. What do you say?
You know, what I'll say is there's extremism on both sides. What I'm really focused on are actually the policies that are actually going to raise us from the situation that we're in right now.
I know a lot of black voters are focused on it.
Yeah.
Are you worried about them?
People are really having a hard time putting food on their table. That's where the majority of people are focused on right now.
Hunt betting on the economy as a major voter issue.
I think that's why we're going to see a big red wave, particularly when it comes to black and brown people.
It's a bet that could bring major wins or losses.
That was NBC's Zincle Esamwa reporting. We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including tonight's Powerball jackpot of almost $2 billion and a hurricane watch for Florida's East Coast. Tonight's headlines begin in the tropics. Parts of Florida are under a hurricane watch. Forecasters expect subtropical storm Nicole to strengthen into a hurricane. As you can see from the latest cone, it's on track to reach Florida's Atlantic coast late Wednesday or early Thursday. That should prevent any interruptions to voting. Today, Governor Ron DeSantis declared a precautionary state of emergency for 34 counties. Meanwhile, communities in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas are cleaning up from a deadly series of tornadoes.
It looked like a war zone, but hey, we're alive.
An outbreak on Friday left 2 people dead, dozens injured, and significant damage across the region. 19 tornadoes were reported. The weather in Ukraine is getting a lot colder. That is becoming the latest threat to civilians. Russian forces are attacking infrastructure, crippling Ukraine's energy supply. Millions of people are without power. In Kyiv, planned and emergency blackouts have become frequent. Temperatures are dropping into the 30s, and officials say they might need to start evacuations. NBC's Matt Bradley is in Kyiv with the latest.
Well, it was a cold day here in Kyiv, one of the coldest so far yet this season, and it is about to get a lot colder. And that's what we heard from Mayor Vitaly Klitschko. He's the world-famous boxing champion and now the mayor of the capital of Ukraine. He's been warning citizens of this city all weekend, and as recently as just today, that they need to be prepared to take drastic action, even if that means leaving this city. And that's because every week, with the exception of just this morning, the Russians have been bombing electricity, water, and other civilian infrastructure all throughout Kyiv, the capital, and really all throughout the country. And a lot of people are saying that they're doing this because, and the Ukrainian government believes they're doing this because they failed to make any advances on the battlefield. The strategy here seems to be to tax the people, to make their lives difficult, to basically create a hostile environment so that they look more favorably at the idea of negotiations or even surrender. Now, that is absolutely repellent to most Ukrainians that you talk to. Most of them are completely unwilling to relent. And that's why Mayor Klitschko has been saying that people might need to try to find a way out of the city if the temperatures continue to sink and they can't get electricity back on, as was happened earlier last week, and heating doesn't seem to work, and the Russians continue to pummel civilian infrastructure. Now, the city is taking measures. They've put out 1,000 heat points throughout the city, but this is a capital of a major country. It still has, despite the war, more than 3 million people. And if you look behind me, it's pretty dark right now. And this is when there's rolling blackouts because of strains on the remaining electricity infrastructure. And those rolling blackouts are likely to persist even as engineers and operators here work 24/7 trying to bring electricity and water back online. That might not mean much if Russia continues its relentless bombardment of civilian infrastructure.
That was NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley reporting from Kyiv. Let's shift from weather to climate. The UN Secretary General is warning world leaders to cooperate or perish when it comes to climate talks. Today, Antonio Guterres set the tone for the UN's annual climate change conference in Egypt. It's known as COP27. Secretary General Guterres repeated his call to phase coal out by 2040. He also issued this stark warning.
The clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
Representatives from nearly 200 countries will attend the summit. Today included speeches from nations hit hard by climate change, such as nations in Africa and island countries. Some of the world's biggest emitters of carbon, like India and Russia, will not be there. China will send an envoy. President Biden plans to arrive after the midterms. Tonight's Powerball jackpot is up to $1.9 billion. The top prizes are getting easier to grow, but harder to win. NBC's Emily Ikeda explains.
Lotto fever is at an all-time high.
This is the largest jackpot in United States history.
With an estimated $1.9 billion up for grabs tonight, Americans nationwide are testing their luck.
Probably buy an island for the family.
So just how much luck do you need? Enough to be that 1 in 292 million.
You got to be in it to win it.
On a daily basis, New Jersey typically sees about $500,000 in Powerball ticket sales. But with a jaw-dropping jackpot on the line, players are buying 16 times that. It's an excitement, experts say, engineered by lottery organizers who are making jackpots easier to grow and harder to win by increasing number combinations in recent years.
So they want really long odds on the jackpot so that we get occasional billion-dollar jackpots.
Felt like a dream that I couldn't wake up from.
Timothy Schultz knows more than anyone that it only takes one ticket to win. He scored $28 million in 1999.
First thing you should do is secure the ticket. The next thing you want to do is seek financial advisors and estate attorneys.
Unfathomable riches driving the dreams of the hopeful.
It's going to be one. Maybe it's going to be me.
Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
Up next, the TV ads and text messages for campaigns will soon be gone, for a while anyway. Candidates are trying to reach as many people as possible before Election Day. But does all that really translate into votes? We'll take a look just ahead. Stay close. Candidates across the country are making their final arguments to voters. Many are banking on political ads to spread their messages.
I'm running for the U.S. Senate because Washington keeps getting it wrong.
One candidate stands with the people, John Fetterman.
My head, I had
Republicans are speaking out about Herschel Walker's history of violence.
I think Herschel Walker would make a great leader. He's humble, he's honest, he's sincere.
Because of Tim Michaels, there are thousands of good-paying jobs in Wisconsin.
Tony Evers, he's doing the right thing for Wisconsin. Got it?
You gotta go vote.
The very first televised political ads aired in the 50s, just as TV was beginning to catch on. See, they've always been part of television. And since then, political advertisements have grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry. According to the Wall Street Journal and Ad Impact, candidates and outside groups have spent at least $7.5 billion in political ads in this election cycle. That's nearly twice as much as the 2018 midterms. Now, if you're from Las Vegas, Philadelphia, or Boston, you might be noticing more ads than other folks might because competitive races there I mean, some people have seen upwards of 30,000 ads since Labor Day. Just how much of an impact do these TV ads have on elections? Joining us now is Chris Warshaw. He's an associate professor in political science at the George Washington University in D.C. Professor Warshaw, welcome. Good to have you with us. So let me ask, first of all, how do we think about impact for political ads? Do we just measure it in terms of who people vote for, or are there other ways to think that through? Professor, I want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure that you don't have your mic muted or anything like that. We'll give him a second to clean that up. We're speaking to political scientist Chris Warshaw from the George Washington University about political advertising. Let me give him one more chance. Professor, can you hear me? Talk back to me if you can hear me. All right, we'll give the professor just another minute. Interested in how we suss out the effectiveness of political advertising compared to, if we have the picture still ready, the presence of campaigners on the campaign trail. We've been monitoring in Ohio, just north of the Dayton International Airport in Vandalia, Ohio. There you can see former President Trump is speaking at a rally in support of Republican Senate candidate J.D. Vance. One of the reasons we've been monitoring these rallies, partly, is obviously to hear what he might be saying. Also, there's been some reporting, you might have seen it over the weekend, we are aware of it as well, but it is as yet unconfirmed, that he might actually declare his candidacy for president in 2024 in the next week or so. Again, unconfirmed, just acknowledging it because I know you get the same notifications on your phone that I get, and it's one of the reasons we've been monitoring these rallies. But again, this is a rally in Vandalia, Ohio. Former President Trump is speaking live. I'm not sure if we're able to get the professor back from George Washington University, but we're keeping an eye on a number of these rallies across the country. We mentioned that Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has been campaigning. Obviously, former President Obama and current President Biden have both been on the campaign trail, and Vice President Kamala Harris has been hitting the trail across the country, including, as we heard from Jacob Soboroff earlier tonight, on the West Coast, where even though there are a lot of Democratic strongholds, and even though there are some Republican strongholds outside areas like Dayton and in the suburbs beyond, the parties are not taking any chances trying to shore up votes ahead of tomorrow's election. Let's get back to Chris Warshaw, who's a political scientist at George Washington University. Professor, can you hear me?
I can. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. It gave me a chance to tee up my first question. Compared to what we see on the campaign trail with folks like former President Trump who show up in person, how do we think about the impact of a political ad on television compared to all the other different ways that we might reach a voter?
Well, we know that political ads help persuade voters. Once voters have decided whether to vote, political ads give them information about the candidates. They tell them who the candidates are. They maybe tell them a little bit about some of the issues with the other candidates in the race. And that helps inform voters as they go into the ballot box and decide how to vote.
Does it really help inform voters? I feel like ads these days, especially in the midterm cycle that maybe is more appealing to the base, they feel like an array of attack ads that, you know, so-and-so is light on crime. So-and-so doesn't want to keep you safe. So-and-so hates puppies. It's like, oh my God, is this useful? At what point do political ads just become noise?
Well, I think that there's clearly diminishing marginal returns to ads. We know that ads, what some co-authors and I found in an academic study that was published last year, was that ads had their biggest effects in races that are down ballot, where people don't know much about the candidates, perhaps they're not seeing all that much advertising, and they tend to have smaller effects as you go up the ballot toward presidential races. And that's because people already know a lot about Joe Biden and Donald Trump and other kind of top of the ticket races. So I think that kind of illustrates that as you see more and more ads, they tend to have less an effect on us.
What about the shifting way these ads reach us? I mean, we know that the nature of linear television, of over-the-air conventional television, is changing rapidly. That's why we're streaming tonight. And the people who watch different kinds of television are moving in a lot of different places, including to apps and to their phones and everywhere else. How does that affect the way that political planners, that campaigns figure out where to put these video ads and who to put them in front of?
Right. Well, increasingly ads are migrating to cable television and to online. It used to be that ads were almost entirely aired on broadcast television, on things like the nightly news, the Seinfeld, the Simpsons, just normal broadcast TV shows. And increasingly they're being shown on social media, on Facebook. But I think that, the kind of voters that vote in midterms, by and large, still watch television. So what we're seeing is that it's still the case that the majority of the ads that are aired on television, and most of those are on broadcast television.
I would be remiss in talking about these ads if I didn't mention the fact that companies like ours own television stations and get an enormous amount of money every 2 years. So our industry has a vested interest in leaving those ads there. As we mentioned, they've been there since 1950 at least, so basically since the beginning of television. Do we just kind of have to suck it up that these ads are a part of television no matter what, and effective or not, they're just not going away because they're too lucrative?
I do think they're going to be with us for a while. I think ads, they'll probably continue to slowly fade away, but they're going to still be on the air. And we know they're going to continue in large part because they still work. They're not going to shift an overwhelmingly Republican state to vote for Democrats or vice versa. But in a close competitive election, ads could shift half a percentage point or, maybe 3/4 of a percentage point of vote share. And that could tip the balance in some of these close Senate races. And in the presidential race in 2020, that would have affected some of the closest states that mattered for the outcome of the election.
Political scientist Chris Warshaw from the George Washington University. Good to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, 2 tech stories to watch. Twitter is asking for a do-over after laying off thousands of employees. And the feds made a multi-billion-dollar bust of Bitcoin. More on that case before we go. Twitter just laid off roughly half its staff. Now the company is reportedly asking some of them to come back. It's a busy time at Elon Musk's new company. Here's NBC's Tom Costello.
On this election eve, Twitter owner Elon Musk seemed to contradict his own tweet from last April that Twitter should be politically neutral, today encouraging independent-minded voters to vote Republicans into Congress. The move comes as advertisers have fled a surge in hate speech and conspiracy theories. Musk today reposted Twitter's rules but said they will evolve over time.
Content moderation policies have not changed at Twitter.
Musk has reportedly started hiring back some of the content moderation staff he laid off on Friday. Roughly 3,700 employees let go, with Musk now saying they will receive 3 months of pay. Also tonight, concern and confusion over the verified blue check marks that Musk says he'll soon charge $8 a month for. He now says he will suspend users who impersonate others, including him, without making the parody clear.
It is chaotic. And Elon Musk tends to operate sort of as an agent of chaos. Which side is going to win out? The getting stuff done Elon Musk when it comes to fixing Twitter, or the chaotic Elon Musk?
Meanwhile, a month after the FBI warned foreign governments could try to influence voters with online disinformation, cybersecurity experts say changes at Twitter could invite more interference.
If we see Twitter make these changes here in the coming days, I would expect that Russian influence actors would move very aggressively to establish accounts.
Also tonight, the Wall Street Journal reports Meta Facebook is considering big layoffs this week. The stock is down 71%, and so far, its bet on virtual reality is not paying off.
That's NBC's Tom Costello reporting. Today, the Justice Department announced one of its largest financial seizures ever. 50,000 stolen Bitcoin, at the time worth more than $3 billion. An IRS investigator in charge of the case calls the heist a sophisticated scheme designed to hide the ill-gotten Bitcoin. On Friday, the suspect, James Zhang, pleaded guilty to wire fraud. Prosecutors say he stole the Bitcoin 10 years ago, on the black market online marketplace Silk Road. The FBI shut Silk Road down back in 2013, and these days, because the cryptocurrency's value has dropped, the seizure is worth just over $1 billion. NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now, and I'm so glad you could join us because I find this case absolutely fascinating. Before we get into the implications of what this means, tell us how this was resolved. How did the feds catch this guy?
So this seizure actually happened almost a year ago, Joshua, though we're just hearing about it now. And it's not exactly clear how the feds connected the stolen Bitcoin to this defendant. But in November 2021, law enforcement officials executed a search warrant at his home in Gainesville, Georgia, and they seized more than 50,000 Bitcoin, which was then valued at over $3 billion. Now, the price has since fallen steeply, so it's now worth around $1 billion, still a nice payday for the U.S. government.
Now, when you say they seized the Bitcoin from his home, I thought Bitcoin were virtual, they existed in the web. What exactly was it that the feds took from his home?
They are virtual, but in this case, they were stored on drives that they found hidden in his home, among some other paraphernalia.
Talk a little bit more about Silk Road. I think one of the things about this that so fascinates me is I remember when Silk Road was a thing, right? And they were talking about this lawless online marketplace where people could buy and sell anything in Bitcoin, and it was anonymized, and we'll never get our arms around it. It feels like this kind of belies the whole theory behind some of these cryptocurrencies and their ability to be so anonymized that nobody could ever catch them. I don't know if that means that law enforcement has caught up to that, or if they were never as anonymous as we thought, or what does that tell us?
It's a little of both, Joshua. The idea that cryptocurrency is totally anonymous is a myth because the transactions are posted on a public ledger called the blockchain, and they remain there forever. Now, they may be anonymous in the sense that they're not attached to a name, but a new generation of software is now using data analysis to connect transactions to people, and law enforcement is doing business with companies that provide that software, and which essentially now the cops are able to make these kinds of cases years after the alleged crime.
Zoom out for us a little, Ken, because we've talked about how ransomware has increased across the country and around the world. A number of the ransomers demand to be paid in Bitcoin and will even provide customer service to their victims on how to do it. So it seems like there's a real significant law enforcement need to improve the way that governments investigate crimes using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And the U.S. government has certainly responded to that. The FBI set up a crypto unit earlier this year. The IRS has been very active in using this software to kind of trace the proceeds of crypto crime and connect, again, people to transactions. But we're really only at the beginning stages, I think, of this cat and mouse game between the criminals and law enforcement over crypto.
Where do you, since we're at the beginning of this cat and mouse game, where do you see it going next? Does this mean that the federal government is getting wise to this? Congress is demanding more action. The Justice Department is demanding more action. No one likes to see criminals get away with crimes, but who's kind of leading the push in terms of making it so the law can investigate these new kinds of crimes?
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of sort of know your customer kind of regulations put in place so that, and you know, again, this depends on governments requiring crypto exchanges to get basic information about their customers, just the way banks do, to make it more difficult to use crypto anonymously. It's kind of, you know, it's sort of currency 101, but in the beginning of this, people were able to set up accounts without very much information, and a lot of that is changing. But again, each country has to impose those rules on their own crypto industry.
Since this involves the seizure of something of value, what happens to the Bitcoin? Does the government keep it? Does it go back into the ecosystem? Where's the money go?
So the U.S. Marshals actually will auction it off because the government treats this as like a currency, as securities rather than a currency. And then the proceeds will go back to law enforcement to continue to pursue these kinds of investigations, Joshua.
Before I have to let you go, what I don't want people to come away from the story who don't understand cryptocurrency feeling like Bitcoin is dangerous. Bitcoin is not inherently dangerous, and I think the systems that Bitcoin uses are not inherently dangerous, but they can be used for criminal aims just like dollars can be used for criminal aims. What should people take away from this in terms of what our relationship is to crypto, particularly what the law's relationship is these days?
Well, I think the lesson of this story is that criminals once thought that crypto was a huge advantage in crime, but they're now learning that it perhaps is not as anonymous as they thought, and law enforcement is catching up. And so if this money had been laundered in cash, I don't think they would be seizing it right now, years after the alleged crime. But because it was crypto, years later, they were able to trace it to this defendant, find it, and seize it, Joshua.
It's so fascinating. It's like catching a marked bill in circulation 10 years later. I think this story is endlessly fascinating, and I'll be interested to see where law enforcement goes with this from here. Thank you, Ken. That's NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian from our Washington Bureau. Remember to join us for election coverage tomorrow night, but until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. I will see you back here on Wednesday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.